merely explains the path that magic travels, and not its essential nature, that is, it does not explain the misunderstanding which bids it put psychological laws in place of natural ones. We are apparently in need here of a dynamic factor, but while the search for this leads the critics of Fraser's theory astray, it will be easy to give a satisfactory explanation of magic by carrying its association theory further and by entering more deeply into it. First, let us examine the simpler and more important case of imitative magic. According to Fraser, this may be practiced by itself, whereas contagious magic as a rule presupposes the imitative. The motives which impel one to exercise magic are easily recognized. They are the wishes of men. We need only assume that primitive man had great confidence in the power of his wishes. At bottom, everything which he accomplished by magic means must have been done solely because he wanted it. Thus in the beginning only his wish is accentuated. In the case of the child which finds itself under analogous psychic conditions, without being as yet capable of motor activity, we have elsewhere advocated the assumption that it at first really satisfies its wishes by means of hallucinations, in that it creates the satisfying situation through centrifugal excitements of its sensory organs. The adult primitive man knows another way. A motor impulse, the will, clings to his wish, and this will, which later will change the face of the earth in the service of wish fulfillment, is now used to represent the gratification so that one may experience it as it were through motor hallucination. Such a representation of the gratified wish is altogether comparable to the play of children, where it replaces the purely sensory technique of gratification. If play and imitative representation suffice for the child and for primitive man, it must not be taken as a sign of modesty in our sense or of resignation due to the realization of their impotence. On the contrary, it is the very obvious result of the excessive valuation of their wish, of the will which depends upon the wish, and of the paths the wish takes. In time the psychic accent is displaced from the motives of the magic act to its means, namely, to the act itself. Perhaps it would be more correct to say that primitive man does not become aware of the overvaluation of his psychic acts until it becomes evident to him through the means employed. It would also seem as if it were the magic act itself which compels the fulfillment of the wish by virtue of its similarity to the object desired. At the stage of animistic thinking, there is as yet no way of demonstrating objectively the true state of affairs, but this becomes possible at later stages when, though such procedures are still practiced, the psychic phenomenon of skepticism already manifests itself as a tendency to repression. At that stage men will acknowledge that the conjuration of spirit avails nothing unless accompanied by belief, and that the magic effect of prayer fails if there is no piety behind it. The possibility of a contagious magic which depends upon contiguous association will then show us that the psychic valuation of the wish and the will has been extended to all psychic acts which the will can command. We may say that at present there is a general overvaluation of all psychic processes. That is to say, there is an attitude towards the world which, according to our understanding of the relation of reality to thought, must appear like an overestimation of the latter. Objects, as such, are overshadowed by the ideas representing them. What takes place in the latter must also happen to the former, and the relations which exist between ideas are also postulated as to things. As thought does not recognize distances and easily brings together in one act of consciousness things spatially and temporally far removed, the magic world also puts itself above spatial distance by telepathy and treats a past association as if it were a present one. In the animistic age, the reflection of the inner world must obscure that other picture of the world which we believe we recognize. Let us also point out that the two principles of association, similarity and contiguity, meet in the higher unity of contact. Association by contiguity is contact in the direct sense, and association by similarity is contact in the transferred sense. Another identity in the psychic process, which has not yet been grasped by us, is probably concealed in the use of the same word for both kinds of associations. It is the same range of the concept of contact which we have found in the analysis of taboo. In summing up, we may now say that the principle which controls magic and the technique of the animistic method of thought is omnipotence of thought. Section 3. I have adopted the term omnipotence of thought from a highly intelligent man, a former sufferer from compulsion neurosis, who after being cured through psychoanalytic treatment was able to demonstrate his efficiency and good sense. He had coined this phrase to designate all those peculiar and uncanny occurrences which seem to pursue him just as they pursue others afflicted with his malady. Thus, if he happened to think of a person, he was actually confronted with this person, as if he had conjured him up. If he inquired suddenly about the state of health of an acquaintance whom he had long missed, he was sure to hear that this acquaintance had just died, so that he could believe that the deceased had drawn his attention to himself by telepathic means. If he uttered a half-meant imprecation against a stranger, he could expect to have him die soon thereafter, and burden him with the responsibility for his death. He was able to explain most of these cases in the course of the treatment. He could tell how the illusion had originated and what he himself had contributed towards furthering his superstitious expectations. All compulsion neurotics are superstitious in this manner, and often against their better judgment. The existence of omnipotence of thought is most clearly seen in compulsion neurosis, where the results of this primitive method of thought are most often found or met in consciousness. But we must guard against seeing in this a distinguishing characteristic of this neurosis, for analytic investigation reveals the same mechanism in other neuroses. In every one of the neuroses, it is not the reality of the experience, but the reality of the thought, which forms the basis for the symptom formation. Neurotics live in a special world in which, as I have elsewhere expressed it, only the neurotic standard of currency counts. That is to say, only things intensively thought of or affectively conceived are effective with them, regardless of whether these things are in harmony with outer reality. The hysteric repeats in his attacks and fixates through his symptoms occurrences which have taken place only in his fantasy, though in the last analysis they go back to real events or have been built up from them. The neurotic's guilty conscience is just as incomprehensible if traced to real misdeeds. A compulsion neurotic may be oppressed by a sense of guilt, which is appropriate to a wholesale murderer, while at the same time he acts toward his fellow beings in a most considerate and scrupulous manner, a behavior which he evinced since his childhood. And yet his sense of guilt is justified. It is based upon intensive and frequent death wishes, which unconsciously manifest themselves toward his fellow beings. It is motivated from the point of view of unconscious thoughts, but not of intentional acts. Thus the omnipotence of thought, the overestimation of psychic processes as opposed to reality, proves to be of unlimited effect in the neurotic's affective life and in all that emanates from it. But if we subject him to psychoanalytic treatment, which makes his unconscious thoughts conscious to him, he refuses to believe that thoughts are free and is always afraid to express evil wishes, lest they be fulfilled in consequence of his utterance. But through this attitude, as well as through the superstition which plays an active part in his life, he reveals to us how close he stands to the savage, who believes he can change the outer world by a mere thought of his. The primary obsessive actions of these neurotics are really altogether of a magical nature. If not magic, they are at least anti-magic, and are destined to ward off the expectation of evil with which the neurosis is wont to begin. Whenever I was able to pierce these secrets, it turned out that the content of this expectation of evil was death. According to Schopenhauer, the problem of death stands at the beginning of every philosophy. We have heard that the formation of the soul conception and of the belief in demons which characterize animism are also traced back to the impression which death